On her wedding day, in front of family, friends, and the entire city, she was called worthless by the man she thought she loved, humiliated before everyone. But just when her world was about to collapse, the church doors shook, 50 black SUVs stormed in, and the feared Mafia Boss himself stood in front of the altar declaring, "She's mine." Before we dive in, smash that subscribe button, drop a like, and comment where you're watching from, because this story will leave you breathless. The church was nothing short of a fairy tale. Golden chandeliers hung above, glittering light across rows of guests dressed in their finest. White roses lined the aisle, filling the air with their sweet perfume. The music swelled softly from the organ, and all eyes were on her, the bride. She was radiant. Her gown shimmered as she walked down the aisle, her hands clutching her bouquet like it was her lifeline. Her heart raced with excitement, nerves, and a fragile hope that today, finally today, she would be loved unconditionally. Her groom stood waiting, tall, handsome, and expressionless. She had ignored the red flags, the harsh words he'd thrown at her in private, because she believed marriage would change him. She believed that in front of God and witnesses, he would become the man she dreamed of. But she was wrong. The priest smiled kindly, his voice gentle as he asked the groom to repeat the sacred vows. The church grew silent, every guest leaning forward, eager to hear the words of commitment. The groom glanced at the bride, his lips curled into a smirk, and instead of love, instead of promise, he leaned closer and whispered one word that shattered her world. Worthless. Her heart stopped. She blinked rapidly, unable to process the word, but before she could react, the groom straightened his back and, in front of everyone, turned away. He stepped back from the altar, his shoes echoing on the polished floor as he walked down the aisle, leaving her behind. The gasp that swept through the crowd was deafening. "She's worthless?" someone whispered. "Did he just leave her?" another said in shock. "My God, how cruel." Her bouquet slipped from her trembling hands and crashed to the floor, petals scattering like broken dreams. She swayed on her feet, her breath shallow, tears stinging her eyes. Her family buried their faces in shame, while her friends sobbed quietly in disbelief. The priest stood frozen, unsure of what to say. The guests were buzzing like angry bees, pointing, whispering, judging. The bride's knees gave out, and she nearly collapsed to the floor until the sound came. A low, deep rumble. Engines. Dozens of them. The stained glass windows trembled, the church doors rattled violently, and the murmurs of gossip turned into screams of fear as 50 black SUVs stormed into the street outside. The roar of engines silenced everything. Guests clutched their pearls. The priest staggered back. Even the arrogant groom froze mid-step, his smirk melting into a look of dread. The church doors flew open. Men in black suits and dark sunglasses flooded in, their footsteps echoing like thunder. They moved with precision, forming two lines down the aisle. The air shifted, heavy, suffocating, as though the underworld itself had arrived. And then he appeared. The Mafia Boss. Tall, broad-shouldered, his suit flawless, his presence larger than life. A blood-red tie cut across his chest, his eyes sharp as blades, scanning the room with deadly calm. This was a man who needed no introduction. His name carried fear. His face carried power. And now, he was here, inside the church. Each step he took down the aisle was deliberate, commanding. His men flanked him, but their presence was almost invisible compared to the force he carried alone. He stopped in front of the bride, who stood trembling, her tears still wet on her cheeks, her world still crumbling. The Mafia Boss's gaze softened ever so slightly when he looked at her. Then he turned his head, locking eyes with the groom. "You," he said, his voice a low growl that made the hairs on every neck rise. "You dared to call her worthless?" The groom swallowed hard, his arrogance gone. She, this isn't." The boss smirked coldly, cutting him off. "If she is worthless, then tell me, why is it that I, the man you fear most, stand here now to claim her?" The church erupted in gasps. Guests covered their mouths. Cameras flashed like wildfire. The bride's heart thudded painfully in her chest, her mind spinning. The Mafia Boss turned back to her, his hand lifting slowly, steadily. His voice lowered, intimate but unshakable. "She's mine." The words fell like thunder, echoing through the sacred hall. The groom's face drained of all color. Rage and humiliation twisted his features, but he dared not move. Armed men surrounded the room. The power balance had shifted completely. The Mafia boss extended his hand to her, palm open. "Come with me. No one will ever call you worthless again." Her hands shook violently. She looked at her groom, the man who had humiliated her, the man who stripped her of dignity in front of the world. Then she looked at the Mafia boss, feared, dangerous, yet in that moment, the only one who stood for her. Her breath caught. Her hand lifted slowly, and she placed it into his. The boss closed his fingers around hers, firm and protective. He pulled her close, wrapping her in his shadow, shielding her from the venomous stares and whispers. His men closed ranks, guiding them back down the aisle. The doors of the church opened wide once more, sunlight spilling across the floor. Together, they walked into the light, into the roaring convoy of SUVs waiting outside. The bride's heart was still broken, her mind still reeling, but as the boss guided her into the back seat of the largest SUV, she realized something shocking. For the first time in her life, she did not feel worthless. The roar of engines swallowed the last whispers of the church as the convoy thundered away from the scene of her humiliation. She sat pressed against the leather seat of the black SUV, her gown shimmering under the dim lights inside, her chest rising and falling as though she had just escaped death. Every turn of the wheels felt like the closing of a door to her old life. The Mafia boss sat beside her, his presence so overwhelming it filled the entire car. He didn't look at her at first, his eyes locked on the road ahead, his posture unshakable. Around them, shadows moved, armed men in black suits, their gazes cold, their loyalty undeniable. Outside, the city blurred past. The people unaware that the bride the world had just mocked now rode with the most feared man alive. Her heart was still broken, her tears drying on her cheeks, but in the silence she felt something strange, safety. He hadn't let her collapse at the altar. He hadn't let her drown in shame. In front of everyone, he had claimed her. And though she knew his reputation, though whispers of blood and power surrounded his name, in that moment, he felt like her only lifeline. The convoy turned sharply and entered the gates of a massive estate. High walls loomed overhead, guards armed with rifles patrolled every corner, and fountains sparkled under golden lights. The SUV stopped in front of a mansion so grand it looked carved out of a dream. The doors opened, and men lined both sides, bowing their heads as the boss stepped out, pulling her gently with him. Cameras had once recorded her disgrace. Now eyes filled with fear and respect followed her every step. Inside, the mansion was breathtaking. Marble floors stretched endlessly, chandeliers dripped crystal fire, and portraits of men who had ruled before him glared from the walls. Every corner spoke of wealth, power, and danger. She walked through the grand hall like a ghost, her gown whispering against the floor, her mind spinning with disbelief. Hours ago, she was a humiliated bride. Now, she was walking into the lion's den, hand in hand with the man the city feared most. Servants bowed, offering trays of wine, but she waved them away, her hands trembling too much to hold a glass. He finally turned his gaze on her, those dark eyes cutting straight into her soul. The weight of his stare made her lower her eyes, her heart pounding. She wondered if she had escaped humiliation only to walk willingly into captivity. But then something happened that shook her more than his power. He removed his suit jacket and placed it gently over her shoulders. No words, no theatrics, just a gesture so simple, yet so powerful, it unraveled her. The man who commanded killers, the man who made kings tremble, had shown her respect. Something her groom had never given her, not even once. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay awake in the silken sheets of a room larger than her entire family home, staring at the ceiling while shadows danced across the walls. The weight of the day pressed on her chest, the humiliation, the shame, the thunder of engines, his words echoing like fire. She's mine. Was she a guest here, or a prisoner? Did she have a choice, or had destiny already chosen for her? She rose from the bed and walked to the balcony. The estate stretched endlessly below, glowing like a hidden city of its own. Guards moved like shadows, fountains whispered, and in the courtyard, 50 black SUVs gleamed under the moonlight. She clutched the jacket still around her shoulders, breathing in the faint scent of him, a mixture of smoke, leather, and danger. Her heart betrayed her, fluttering with confusion. Behind her, the sound of heavy footsteps approached, and her body froze. He stepped into the room, his figure filling the doorway, the night bending around him. She turned slowly, meeting his eyes once more, and for the first time she realized something terrifying. He hadn't saved her to make her his prisoner. He hadn't saved her to shame her further. He had saved her because, in a world where power was everything, he saw her worth. And though she tried to fight it, though fear still clawed at her chest, she felt it deep in her bones. Her life had changed forever the moment those church doors opened. But far away, in the darkness of the city, another storm was rising. The man who had called her worthless was not finished. The humiliation of being upstaged by the Mafia Boss in front of hundreds burned like acid in his veins. He had lost his bride, his pride, and his power in one single moment. And he swore he would take it all back, no matter the cost. The bride stood on the balcony, clutching the jacket of the most dangerous man alive, unaware that her story was no longer just about heartbreak. It was about loyalty, power, and survival. She had been claimed by the Mafia Boss, but she was about to discover what it truly meant to live in his world. Days turned into nights inside the mansion, and the bride who had once been left in tears at the altar began to breathe a different air. The walls no longer felt like a cage, they felt like a fortress. Every step she took through the endless corridors, every glance from the guards who bowed their heads in respect, reminded her that she was no longer the woman humiliated in front of the world. She was the woman the Mafia Boss had claimed, and the city whispered about her like a legend being born. But whispers cut both ways. In dark corners of the city, her ex-groom seethed like a wounded animal. The humiliation of that day gnawed at him until rage was the only language he understood. The world had watched him abandon her. The world had laughed as another man swept in and stole not just the ceremony, but his pride. He swore he would burn everything the Mafia Boss touched, starting with the bride herself. Alone he was nothing, but with enemies gathering in the shadows, rivals hungry to see the boss fall, he found new allies. Blood money was poured onto the table, guns were loaded, and revenge began to take shape. Back at the mansion, the bride was changing in ways she never imagined. She had come trembling, broken, unsure of her place, but slowly, her voice returned. When the men of the boss's inner circle quarreled, she spoke calmly, and they listened. When decisions about the household were made, she offered ideas that surprised even him. She had lived through pain, through abandonment, through humiliation, and from that pain came wisdom. She wasn't just a bride anymore. She was becoming a queen in a kingdom built on power. The Mafia Boss saw it. His eyes lingered on her longer now, not with pity, but with respect. Late nights in the grand dining hall became evenings by the fire, the tension between them growing thicker with every passing hour. He was a man feared by many, but with her, he lowered the walls brick by brick. She saw the man beneath the steel, the man burdened by power, the man who wanted more than blood and fear. And as she stood closer to him, as she felt his presence like fire against her skin, she realized the truth she had been fighting to deny. She was falling for him. The estate itself became a stage for their growing bond. She laughed in gardens that once felt too cold for joy. She walked past rows of SUVs that once terrified her and felt pride instead of fear. She leaned from balconies into the night, her gown brushing the marble. Knowing eyes from every corner of the city envied her place. She was no longer the bride abandoned. She was the woman desired, respected, and untouchable under his shadow. But shadows carry danger. The rivals moved silently, making deals with her ex-groom, plotting in warehouses, slipping weapons through the cracks of the city. Their plan was simple but deadly. Strike when the Mafia Boss least expected it, and use the woman he claimed as bait. The same bride he had lifted from shame would become the noose they would hang around his neck. The bride sensed something shifting. She noticed strange men lingering too long at the gates, whispers carried by servants too nervous to speak, unease in the eyes of the guards. Danger pressed at the walls of the estate, like a storm cloud swelling too heavy to hold. Her heart beat with fear, but also with something fiercer. She had been abandoned once before, left to crumble under shame. She swore it would not happen again. She watched him one night, standing by the window, his silhouette framed in the moonlight, shoulders heavy with the weight of power. She realized he wasn't invincible, no matter how the world feared him. He was a man, flesh and blood, and by claiming her, he had given his enemies a weapon. She understood then that this love, this impossible, dangerous love, would not be a fairy tale. It would be a war, and she was ready to fight beside him. The city outside slept uneasily, unaware that a storm of betrayal and bullets was gathering. The ex-groom sharpened his plans, the rivals armed themselves, and the mountain of power the Mafia Boss had built was about to be tested like never before. Inside the mansion, the bride closed her eyes as the night air brushed her face, the scent of his jacket still on her shoulders. Her heart thudded with a mixture of fear and fire. She was no longer the woman abandoned at the altar. She was the woman standing in the center of a storm. The night came heavy, the kind of night that felt like the air itself was holding its breath. The estate was quiet, guards patrolling with steady footsteps, the fountains whispering in the courtyard, but beneath it all was a silence too sharp, too unnatural. She felt it before it began, the hairs on her arms rising, her chest tightening with the weight of something dark pressing closer. The first shot shattered the peace. A guard crumpled by the gate, the echo of the bullet ripping through the marble corridors. Then came the roar, engines storming the estate from every side, headlights slicing through the night. Dozens of black trucks, masked men spilling out like shadows given teeth. The storm had arrived. She grabbed the balcony rail as the courtyard erupted in chaos. The Mafia Boss was already there, moving like a predator awakened, his men forming lines around him. Gunfire lit the night, sparks flashing against stone walls, the air thick with smoke and screams. But through the chaos she saw him, her ex-groom, standing at the front of the invading army, rage carved across his face. He had not come for wealth. He had not come for power. He had come for her. The rival gangs swarmed, bullets tearing into the mansion, windows shattering, statues crumbling. She ran through the corridors, her gown catching on splintered wood, her heart pounding, Ranger at her side, snarling with fury. The mansion that had once felt like a fortress now felt like a battlefield. Yet deep inside, she knew she could not hide. Not again. Not ever. She burst into the grand hall just as the enemy broke through the doors. Her ex-groom's eyes found hers, burning with twisted satisfaction. In his mind, she was still the woman he had left broken at the altar, the one he could crush again. But he didn't see the fire in her now. The Mafia Boss fought like a man who had everything to lose, his presence commanding the room, each shot precise, each move filled with fury. His men fell, his enemies advanced, but he never wavered. He was not just fighting for his empire tonight, he was fighting for her. And then the moment came. Her ex-groom broke through the chaos, gun raised, aiming not at the boss, but at her. The world slowed, the screams drowned out, the sound of her heartbeat thundering in her ears. He had humiliated her once, but he would not destroy her now. She moved before anyone could stop her. With shaking hands, she grabbed the fallen weapon of a guard beside her and lifted it high. For a second the weight felt unbearable, but the rage, the pain, the betrayal of being called worthless fueled her strength. She pulled the trigger, the sound cracking through the hall like judgment itself. The ex-groom stumbled, shock etched across his face, his gun clattering uselessly to the floor. He fell back, defeated not by the Mafia Boss, but by the very woman he had once abandoned. Silence rippled through the chaos as eyes turned to her. She stood tall, weapon trembling in her grip, but her eyes steady, her chest rising with the fire of victory. The Mafia Boss looked at her, and in that gaze was something unspoken, pride, respect, and a love forged in fire. He moved to her side, his hand steadying hers, and together they faced the last wave of enemies. Bullets rained, but none struck true. His men surged forward with renewed fury, Ranger lunged with savage loyalty, and the rivals crumbled under the force of their defiance. When the smoke finally cleared, the mansion stood battered but unbroken. Bodies littered the courtyard, weapons abandoned, trucks overturned. The enemies had come with fire, but they left with ashes. She stood in the center of it all, her gown torn, her hair wild, the scent of smoke clinging to her. The world had seen her fall, but now the world would see her rise. She was no longer the bride left at the altar. She was the woman who had stood in the storm, lifted a weapon, and claimed her worth. The mafia boss stepped closer, his face marked with cuts, his suit torn, but his eyes locked only on her. He pulled her into his arms, and in that embrace was a vow stronger than any made at an altar. She had been claimed in front of the world, but tonight, she had claimed herself. Days later, when the dust settled and the city whispered of what had happened, another wedding was prepared. But this time, there was no priest fumbling with vows, no crowd waiting to judge. There was only a man who had fought for her, and a woman who had fought for herself. And when he placed the ring on her finger, there was no humiliation, no doubt. Only the thunder of applause from loyal men and the quiet knowledge that she was no longer worthless. She was his queen. And that's how a bride humiliated at the altar rose from the ashes, claimed by the most feared mafia boss, and turned her pain into unstoppable power. From worthless in the eyes of one man, to priceless in the arms of another. If this story left you speechless, wait till you see what's coming next. Hit that subscribe button, smash the like, and tell me in the comments. Would you have walked away with the mafia boss, or would you have taken revenge on the groom yourself? Stay tuned. The next twist will blow your mind.